The courtroom in Norquay still had its original 1927 wainscoting, dark, varnished maple gone the color of strong tea, and on that February morning the radiators knocked and hissed against 18 below outside, and the tall windows held a light so pale and hard it looked poured rather than shone. Margot Delane sat at the plaintiff's table in a camel coat that cost more than the month's docket, flanked by two lawyers from Duluth Money somewhere, her portfolio squared in front of her, her posture set for winning, because Margot had come to collect 6 households in one motion, and she had never once in her life walked into a room she did not believe she owned. The clerk called the case numbers. The bailiff said the words courtrooms have opened with for 200 years. All rise. The honorable judge presiding. And through the chamber's door in black robes, unhurried, came a tall, spare man of 74 with a farmer's hands and a burn scar still pink along one wrist, and he crossed to the bench the way he crossed his own orchard, without hurry and without doubt, and he looked out at the room the way he had looked out at rooms for 31 years. Margot Delane froze. The portfolio slid from the table. Papers fanned across the carpet like a dropped hand of cards, and nobody moved to gather them, because everyone was watching her face do something faces are not supposed to do in public, and into that silence, onto the record, into the microphone, in front of a court reporter whose fingers never stopped. Margot said, in a whisper the whole room heard, "That's him. He's supposed to be gone." Nobody said the old man was a judge. 4 months earlier, this woman had stood in the wet black ashes of that old man's home, in the smell of burnt pine and drowned char, and smiled. She was about to learn what he had spent his life doing in rooms exactly like this one, and she was about to learn it on the record. To understand how it came to this, it helps to go back, past the fire, past the fines, past the smiling offers, all the way back to 1911, when a 23-year-old Finnish immigrant named Aino Koski walked the last 9 miles from the rail stop at Norquay because he could not afford the wagon, and filed on 11 4/10 acres of cut-over pine land on a granite point, reaching into Whitethroat Lake, in Cipala County, in country so far north the growing season could be counted in weeks. The point was called Kettle Point, for the glacial kettle pond behind it, and everyone said the land was ruined. Logged bare, good for nothing, and Aino, who had been told the same thing about himself, took it anyway. He cleared stumps by hand and by borrowed ox. He planted apple trees the county agent swore would winter kill and grafted them stubborn, and they lived. And in 1919, over one whole summer, with his brothers and a horse and a book of church hall promises instead of money, he built the farmhouse, 2 stories of white pine he milled himself, a fieldstone foundation, a granite hearth whose center stone took 4 men to set, and a steep roof built for snow. By the shore he raised a cedar sauna because a Finn will build the sauna before he finishes the barn, and on winter Saturdays the smoke stood straight up off the lake like a flag. His daughter Helvi was born in that house in 1928, in the room over the kitchen, and she died in it 81 years later. And in between, she became the kind of woman that towns like Norquay are secretly built around. She married a logger named Sayer who was killed by a widowmaker limb when their only child was 6, and she did not remarry and did not leave. She kept the orchard, kept the books for the co-op, and kept, famously, a door that did not lock and a blue enamel coffee pot that never fully cooled. During the mill strike in the winter of 1958, she fed as many as 30 people a day at the long birch table her father had built, strikers and foremen at the same benches, on venison and cardamom bread. And when anyone tried to thank her, she would say that a house was only walls around a table and wave them toward the pot. Her son, Edmund Sayer, grew up splitting wood and pruning apples and reading everything the bookmobile carried. And then he did the thing the gifted children of poor counties do. He left. Law school downstate on scholarship. A practice. Then, at 37, a district court appointment, and Edmund Sayer spent the next 31 years on the bench. 19 in district court and 12 on the state court of appeals, the last 5 as its chief judge. And in all those years he came home for 2 weeks every August and 1 week every deer season, and he called his mother on Sunday nights, and it was not enough. And he knew it was not enough, and he knew it was not enough, and Helvoy never once said so, which made it worse. He was in the middle of oral arguments in the capital 340 miles away when she had the stroke. He drove north through the night and made the hospice in Norquay by morning, and he had 4 days with her, and on the last of them, when her speech had come part way back, she took his hand in both of hers, small hands, hard as apple wood, and gave him the only instruction she had ever given him as an order rather than a suggestion. Keep the house, Edmund. Keep the coffee hot and the door open. Somebody is always colder than you. That was October of 2009. He retired from the Court of Appeals 14 months later, at the mandatory age, declined every offer that would have kept him in the capital, and drove north with his robes in a garment bag he never unpacked, and moved back into the room over the kitchen. He pruned the orchard back into bearing. He fired the sauna on Saturdays. He fixed the 100 small things a grieving house accumulates, and he kept the blue enamel pot on the back of the stove, and neighbors learned, the way neighbors learn, that the door at Kettle Point still didn't lock. To Norkey, he was simply Ed Sayer, Helvey's boy, the quiet one who'd worked downstate and come home, who sold apples off the tailgate in October and plowed 3 widows' driveways without being asked. He signed his co-op forms E. Sayer. He had spent 3 decades being addressed as Your Honor, and he found he did not miss it at all, and he mentioned it to no one, not out of secrecy, but out of the particular relief of a man taking off a heavy coat indoors. Once a year, quietly, the state Supreme Court sent him a letter renewing his certification as a retired judge subject to recall, a senior judge, available when a small county's docket flooded, or a sitting judge recused. Twice he had served a few weeks in distant counties. He kept the certification current the way his mother had kept the pot warm. You never knew who might need it. The subdivision arrived on the far shore in 2007 and crept around the lake year by year. Aurora Shores, 96 homes eventually. Timber-look gables and heated driveways and pontoon lifts wrapped around 3 sides of Whitethroat Lake with the Koski. 0.11 acres, 940 feet of granite shoreline, and the only deep, sheltered water on the entire lake, sitting at its center like a thumb in its eye. Margot Delane found the point personally offensive the first time she saw it. And she saw it the way she saw everything, from the stern of a boat, appraising. She had come north in 2018 after 24 years in resort and fractional ownership sales, the last 11 with Boreal Ridge Development Group, where her gift was legendary and specific. She could sell winter. She could stand on a frozen bay in a white parka and make a Chicago radiologist feel the July that was coming. She retired at 51 with a lake house, a ski boat named Closing Costs, and the Discovery. It took 1 season that she could not bear unstructured time. So she ran for the Aurora Shores board, and by 2019 she was president, and the association became the deal she worked instead. Under Margot, the fine schedule grew from 6 categories to 21. Wood smoke after 10 p.m. Fish cleaning odors. Dock flags of non-conforming color. She spoke of the Aurora brand and shoreline integrity, and of herself as the keeper of the vision. And the vision, it emerged in time, had a price tag. Because Boreal Ridge had never really let her go. In 2024, the company came back to its best closer with the project it had wanted since 2007. The Narrows Lodge and Marina, a 60-key lakefront lodge, 140 slips, restaurant, spa, $28 million of construction, financed by a $21.5 million commitment from Voyager State Bank. And every version of the site plan, all 9 revisions, had the same problem because engineering does not negotiate. The only water on Whitethroat deep enough and sheltered enough for a marina lay along the north face of Kettle Point. No point, no slips. No slips, no lodge. No lodge, no fee, and the fee, payable to Margot through a shell called Norland Advisory LLC that had no office and no staff, was $523,000, with the final $20,000, with the final tranche due, in the agreement's own words, upon site control of Parcel K. She went at it first the way a saleswoman goes at it. In June of 2024, she came down the Orchard Drive with a folder and an offer of $410,000 for the point, generous for raw land this far out. And Edmund, picking Japanese beetles off a graft, his grandfather had made in 1931, thanked her and said the land wasn't for sale, not at that number or another number, and offered her coffee, which she declined. She took the refusal the way she took all refusals, as an opening position. She did not ask a single question about him. That was the thing afterward that the investigators kept circling back to, was something like awe, 14 months of pressure, and she never once ran a simple search on the quiet man she was pressing. In her files recovered later, he appears in a due diligence memo in 9 words. Owner, E. Sayer, 74, retired widower or bachelor, no listed profession. No listed profession. Margot Delane, who checked the credit of everyone she ever sold a boat slip to, had gone to war against a man described in her own paperwork as nobody. And it never occurred to her to wonder what kind of nobody keeps 11 acres of the most valuable shoreline in the county and doesn't seem to need the money. The campaign proper began that August, and it followed a curriculum. First came the letters. The Kettle Point parcel, one asserted, lay within the Aurora Shores Buchet and Stewardship area, and its derelict agricultural condition was depressing comparable values. A second demanded he register his sauna as a non-conforming outbuilding. A third, in September, fined him $75 for wood smoke from a chimney that had been drawing since Warren Harding was president, drifting across the lake after 10 p.m. He was not a member of anything. The fines were paper threats with no jurisdiction behind them, and both parties knew it, and that was not the point. The point was volume. The point was to make an old man feel surrounded. Edmund read each letter once, at the birch table with his coffee. Then he photographed the envelope, postmark up, dated the back in pencil, scanned the contents, and filed the original in a folder. Then folders, labeled in a small upright hand. Delane Aurora Shores, number 1. He answered nothing. 31 years on the bench had taught him what most people never learn about paper: that it is patient, that it does not blink, and that the party generating it in anger is usually building the other side's case. He began a log the same week, a habit as old as his first clerkship. Date, time, event, no adjectives. The first entry reads, Aug. 11. Letter, Viewshed. Postmark, Aug. 8. Kept. In October, the patrol started. The association's contracted security pickup began idling on the township road above his orchard. 10 minutes, 30 minutes, its light bar throwing slow orange sweeps through the bare trees, and twice a man photographed the house from the road. Edmund noted plates and times, and that week he mounted cameras, one in plain view over the barn door, because visible cameras change behavior, and 3 more where nobody would think to look, in a birdhouse on the orchard fence, under the sauna eave facing the shore, and in the crotch of a maple covering the drive, a hunter's trail camera in a camouflage shell, the kind of camera that photographs whatever believes itself unobserved. He ran the feeds to a recorder in the house and a duplicate card system he rotated weekly into a fireproof box in the barn. In the log, October 3. Cameras set. Orchard, shore, drive. In November, Margot came back down the drive with a new folder and a lower number. 360,000 now. In light of the parcel's compliance exposure, and Edmund, splitting stovewood by the shed, listened politely, declined again, and invited her, again, to coffee. And Margot, gathering her coat against the wind coming off the gray water, looked past him at the tall white pine house his grandfather had milled by hand, and said the sentence that he wrote into the log verbatim that evening, and that a jury would one day hear read aloud twice. Old pine burns like a prayer, Mr. Sayer. All that history, one bad stove night. I'd hate to see it. He stood in the yard a long moment after her taillights climbed a hill. Then he went inside, added the sentence to the log, dated it, and, the entries in evidence, wrote beneath it a single annotation, the only editorial comment in 400 pages of that log, noted. And he called his insurance agent the next morning and confirmed his coverage was current, and he moved his mother's recipe box, her photographs, and the 1911 land patent to the fireproof box in the barn because he had spent 3 decades listening to testimony, and he knew a threat from a weather report. What he did not move, what it never occurred to him could need moving, was the house itself, and everything a house is. It was Wallace Niemi who finally asked the question out loud, on a Saturday in early December in the sauna by the lake with the stove ticking and the snow coming fat and slow past the little window. Wally had been a bailiff for 26 years in the district court where Edmund first sat, had retired north to fish, and was the one man in Cipolla County who knew exactly who his neighbor was, because he had spent a decade saying all rise as that neighbor walked into rooms. Wally had seen the folders on the birch table. He asked, in the direct way of men in a sauna, why a man who had been the chief judge of the state court of appeals was letting a boat saleswoman fine his chimney. So Edmund said it plainly. For the first time since he'd come home, the steam rising off the rocks between them. 31 years. 19 on the district bench. Every kind of case a county produces, arsons among them, more than he could count. He had sent men to prison for exactly what was coming, and he did not yet know it. Then 12 on the Court of Appeals, 5 as chief, reading records for a living. Thousands of them, learning the one skill that outranks all others in the law, which is the ability to sit still inside a file until it tells you what actually happened. He was still, he added, certified for recall. Senior status. The Supreme Court's letter came every January, and every January he signed it and sent it back. Wally was quiet a while, ladling water, and then he laughed, the short dry laugh of a man who has watched 1,000 lawyers underestimate 1,000 quiet witnesses, and he said the thing that would keep Edmund company through the worst night of his life. 26 years I watched people walk into your courtroom and size you up wrong inside a minute, Wally said. She's done it in the wrong direction. She's building a record against a man whose whole life was reading records. She just doesn't know yet that court is the one place on this earth where you're the weather. 3 days later, Boreal Ridge's lender committee met in Duluth, and the minutes, subpoenaed later, record that the Voyager State Bank commitment would expire, unrenewable, on November 30th the coming year, and that site control of Parcel K remains the sole open condition. Margot Delane had gone from wanting the point to needing it on a date certain. And somewhere in the weeks that followed, in the arithmetic of a closer watching her biggest fee in 20 years slide toward a deadline, she stopped thinking about how to buy the house on Kettle Point and started thinking about how to subtract it. The fire came on the 14th of October, at 12 minutes past 3 in the morning. Edmund was not home. That fact was not luck, it was surveillance. Once a month, he drove 4 hours south to sit with his mother's last living sister in her care home, staying the night at a motel, a pattern anyone watching the drive for a year would know, and someone had been watching the drive for a year. He got the call from the county dispatcher at 4:51 a.m. and drove north with the radio off, and he came over the last hill at first light to find the volunteer department pumping lake water onto a black steaming ruin and the tall white pine house of 1919. The house his grandfather milled and his mother was born in and died in. The house his grandfather milled and his mother was born in and died in. The house he had promised to keep was gone to the foundation. The fieldstone held. The granite chimney stood alone against the pale sky like a monument to itself. Everything else, the birch table, the room over the kitchen, the door that never locked, was ash and black water and steam rising into the cold. He stood at the edge of it for a long time. Firefighters who see what fires do to people left him alone. And what Edmund Sayer thought about, standing in the smell of it, was not the value of anything. He thought about a hospice room and small hard hands around his and keep the coffee hot and the door open, and he understood, with a specific cruelty grief reserves for such moments, that there was no longer a door. He was 74 years old, and he had failed the only order his mother ever gave him. He did not weep then. He walked to the barn, untouched, upwind, checked a fireproof box, found the recipe box and the land patent and the photograph safe, and then he sat down on an apple crate and, in a fresh notebook, in a hand that shook only slightly, started a new log. October 14, house lost. Fire began approx. 3:12 a.m. per dispatch. I was in Bellamy. Cameras, check cards, because the maple by the drive had not burned. Margot came to the ashes 11 days later. She came, remarkably, in person, with a Boreal Ridge site manager and a roll of drawings. On a morning she believed the old man was at his lawyer's, and she walked the black rectangle where the house had been in her white parka, towing the char and the trail camera in the maple. 40 feet away, silent, patient, taking its picture whenever anything moved. Recorded 4 minutes and 20 seconds of video with audio, of which the county attorney would ultimately play the jury only 19 seconds. On the recording, the site manager asks whether the owner will rebuild. And Margot Delane, looking out at the deep water off the north face, says, "Rebuild what? It's a teardown lot now. Ashes negotiate better than owners ever did. He'll take 300 by spring, and honestly, the fire did this lake a favor. 19 seconds. Every arson unit in the country will tell you the same strange truth. They come back. They stand in it. They cannot help it. What they can help, and never do, is talking." The machinery assembled itself around 3 people who were very good at their jobs. The first was Beatrice Lund, 61, a property and insurance litigator with an office over the outfitter's shop in Norquay, who took Edmund's civil case in his folders and said, after a day with him, that she had tried fires for 30 years and had never seen a victim hand her a prosecution-grade file on intake. The second was Kazimir Zielinski, Kaz, a deputy state fire marshal with 22 years of cause and origin work, who processed the scene for 4 days and wrote a report that left no room to stand in. Origin at the northeast sill, exterior, an accelerant pour pattern reading like handwriting in the char. A burn-through sequence inconsistent with any stove, flue, or wiring fault. Classification, incendiary. The chimney fire story someone had been so careful to stage. The fire set beneath the flue exit on a night after a cold snap. To whisper old house, old stove, collapsed under laboratory chromatography that found a petroleum distillate where no petroleum product had any business being. Whoever said it had known just enough about fires to try to speak their language, and not nearly enough to fool a man who had spent 22 years listening to them. And the third was Sheriff Rilla Anderson, who pulled 6 weeks of records with the patience of a county at 18 below. A burner phone, activated at a gas station 40 miles south, that had lived its entire 9-day life in 2 places, a rented room behind the Norquay feedlot and the township road above Kettle Point. Bank withdrawals from Margot Delane's personal account, $2,000, 3 times, cash, across 9 days. Forecourt footage of a drifter handyman named Dusty Creel, 38, filling 2 plastic gas cans at 11:40 on the night of October 13 in a truck that plate readers put on the township road at 2047 a.m. They arrested Creel in November. He sat silent for 9 days, and then his public defender saw the marshal's report and the phone map and the cash. And Dusty Creel, who had been paid $6,000 and promised, "No one home, old wiring, nobody looks twice up here," took a plea and gave them everything, including the text messages he had been told to delete and had photographed instead, out of a drifter's instinct that the person who hires the matchstick next. One text, from a number that came back to a prepaid card bought, investigators established, with a Norland Advisory debit account, read, "Old Pine burns quick. Make it look like the chimney. He's gone the 13th. Old Pine burns." She had set it in his dooryard 11 months earlier, and his log had kept it, dated, verbatim, with its single annotation. Noted. The last door was open from inside. Arne Fossum, 55, the Aurora Shores treasurer, a retired co-op accountant who had joined the board to keep the snowplow contract honest, had spent a year growing quieter in meetings. He had seen the Norland invoices routed through consulting. He had been told in September, before the fire, to authorize purging the association's gate camera archive, 60 days of footage of every vehicle entering or leaving the development, and he had authorized it, and then, because he was an accountant and accountants are constitutionally incapable of destroying a record, he had copied the archive to a hard drive first and taken it home in a bag of ice fishing gear. 11 days after Creel's arrest, Arne Fossum walked into the sheriff's office with the drive, the Norland ledger, and 4 years of emails and sat down heavily and said he believed he had been keeping books for something terrible. On the drive, Margot's own SUV logged out the Aurora Shores gate at 2:31 a.m. on October 14th, back in at 4:06. She had not trusted the drifter to do it right. She had gone to watch. And in the emails was the document that Beatrice Lund would slide across more than one table in the year ahead, always without comment because it required none. A Boreal Ridge planning memorandum, 8 months old, titled Narrows, Site Control, Parcel K, which walked through appraisals and easements in the bloodless dialect of development, and then, in its final paragraph, said this: "The obstacle is not price. Owner attachment is structural, not financial. The attachment is the house. Remove the structure and the attachment has nowhere to live. Post-event acquisition estimate, 290-3 Form Willie K. Remove the structure and the attachment has nowhere to live." Somebody had typed that sentence, read it back, and hit send. Kaz Zielinski, no stranger to what people do to each other, said later that in 22 years of firework, it was the only piece of paper that ever made him step outside. Which brings the story back to the courtroom in Norquay and the cold poured light of that February morning, and the case numbers the clerk called, not Edmund's case. Edmund's civil suit and the criminal file were before other judges in another county. He was a party, a victim, and the wall between those roles and the bench is absolute, and no one alive respected that wall more than he did. No, the matters on that morning's calendar were the association's own. Aurora Shores Owners Association v. Lindgren v. Yahoo, and 4 more, the omnibus lien foreclosure and enforcement blitz Margot had launched against 6 households on the lake's cheaper North Shore, 6 families whose parcels stood in the way of the marina's parking and utility corridor, 6 defendants chosen, her own project notes would later show, for the same quality she had once attributed to Edmund: low litigation risk. Cipala County had 1 sitting judge, and that judge had recused from all association matters in December for the oldest small-town reason there is. His brother-in-law owned a lot in Aurora Shores, and the Supreme Court's assignment office had done what it always does. It reached for the list of certified senior judges resident the district. The list, that winter, had 1 name on it. The order of assignment had gone out in January, public as a courthouse door, to a docket Margot Delane never read closely, because she had never once lost interest in an opponent faster than she lost interest in paperwork. And so she squared her portfolio at the plaintiff's table, and the bailiff said, "All rise," and the door opened, and the nobody from Kettle Point walked to the bench in black robes, and the portfolio slid, and the papers fanned, and the court reporter's fingers never stopped. That's him. He's supposed to be gone, Nobody said the old man was a judge. What followed lasted 4 minutes and is quoted in full in the appellate reports. Judge Edmund Sayer, on the record, calm as morning, disclosed that he was the owner of the Kettle Point parcel and a crime victim in a pending investigation involving the Plaintiff Association's president, stated that he would not and could not preside over any matter touching that association, recused himself from the entire calendar, and referred all 6 cases to the chief judge of the district for reassignment. He decided nothing. He signed nothing but his own recusal. He was, as he had been for 31 years, scrupulous to the boundary stone, and then, before rising, he did the one thing the law permitted him and the moment demanded. He looked at the plaintiff's table and asked, mildly, whether counsel wished the record to reflect their client's spontaneous statement, or whether the reporter's transcript would suffice. Counsel did not answer. The transcript sufficed. Within a week, it was in the hands of County Attorney Signe Rude, who read the words "he's supposed to be gone," spoken by a woman whose SUV had left a locked gate at 2:31 in the morning, and added a count. Chief Judge Inez Vargas reassigned the 6 cases to a visiting judge from 2 districts over, and it took that judge 1 motion cycle to dismiss all 6 for the same defects Edmund would have found. Because the defects were not subtle, they had simply been aimed at people who could not afford to point at them. And in April, in the district courthouse in Bellamy, before Judge Cordelia Mears, the state called Margot Delane to answer for arson in the first degree, conspiracy, and solicitation, and Signe Rude built the case the way a mason builds a chimney, 1 squared stone at a time, in rhythm. The marshal's report, incendiary. The chromatography, petroleum distillate, northeast sill, the burner phone's 9-day life, mapped in red dots on a screen, the feedlot, the township road, the feedlot, the township road, the township road. The withdrawals, 2000, 2000, 2000. The forecourt footage, 2 gas cans, 11:40 p.m. Dusty Creel, pale and plain, telling the jury what he was paid and what he was told, and reading aloud the text. Old pine burns quick, make it look like the chimney, while the defendant studied her hands. The gate log, out 2031 in 46. Then Edmund's log, admitted through him as a witness, like any witness, and the entry of the previous November read to the jury in his level, unhurried voice, "Old pine burns like a prayer, Mr. Sayer." All that history, one bad stove night, I'd hate to see it. Noted. And last, the trail camera's 19 seconds played twice at the defense's own insistence, which was a mistake, because some sentences get worse with repetition. Ashes negotiate better than owners ever did. The fire did this lake a favor. Mid-trial, the defense pivoted. The texts were Creel's invention, the gate log a glitch, the memo removed the structure, and the attachment has nowhere to live. Mere aggressive deal language. Signe Rude dismantled the pivot with 3 exhibits and no adjectives. The prepaid cards purchase trail to the Norland account, the metadata assigning the memo's final paragraph to Margot's own login, and Arnie Fossum, steady as a ledger line, testifying that he had been ordered to purge 60 days of gate footage, 19 days before the fire. The jury was out 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Mears, at sentencing, used the formal language that ends things, finding the offense planned, financed, and supervised in person, aimed at a home of 3 generations for commercial gain, and imposed 17 years, calling the defendant, in a phrase, the wire services carried, a woman who mistook other people's lives for inventory. The dominoes went in order. Loose Spruce Mutual denied every coverage claim under the intentional acts exclusion, leaving Margot and the 2 board members who had co-signed the litigation blitz personally exposed in the civil case, which settled on the courthouse steps for the full policy-free amount, $2,100,000, secured by the lake house and the boat named closing costs. Voyager State Bank pulled the $21.5 million commitment on a Tuesday. Boreal Ridge abandoned the Narrows on the Friday, settled Edmund's claims against it for $3,400,000, and recorded, at Beatrice Lund's insistence, a covenant running with its remaining land never to seek marina rights on the north face of Kettle Point. 4 board members resigned in 1 week. The membership, meeting under a neutral, voted 181-9 to remove the remnants of the old board, cut the fine schedule from 21 categories to 4, and wrote into the bylaws that no officer might ever again hold a paid interest in any development within 5 miles, a provision the newsletters called, without anyone asking Edmund's permission, the Kettle Point Rule. The 6 North Shore families got their fees back and their liens expunged, and the Lindgrens and old Mrs. Aho came out to the point in May with a casserole and an apology neither of them owed him. And through that spring, at the birch folding table he set up in the barn, a retired judge who could no longer sit on their cases did the humbler thing instead. He read documents for people, one by one, quietly, for nothing. Leases, liens, letters that had frightened them, because reading records was his trade, and a trade is for using. He never gloated. When a reporter from Duluth asked him, on the courthouse steps, how it felt to win, he considered the question seriously, the way he had considered questions for 31 years, and said that no one who had smelled his mother's house on his clothes for a month would call any of it winning, and went home. Home. Because the house went back up. Not a replacement, a resurrection, board by board. The foundation had held. The chimney had never fallen. And through May and June and July, a crew that was half hired carpenters and half unpaid neighbors. Wally Niemi bossing the scaffold like a bailiff, Arnie Fossum keeping the material book, the Lindgren boys hauling white pine from a mill 2 counties over, raised the frame of 1919 again from Ino Koski's own drawings, which had survived in the barn in a cardboard tube, dimension in draftsman's pencil, and annotated in finish in the margins. Edmund worked every day he could stand it, 74 years old, with a chisel, cutting the joints slow and true, and found that grief, which cannot be argued with, can sometimes be planned. It was in August, resetting the great granite hearthstone 4 men to move it exactly as in 1919, that they found it. A shallow dry cavity under the stone's north edge, masoned deliberately, and in it a tobacco tin, and in the tin, folded in oilcloth, a letter in his mother's strong, slanted hand, dated the winter of 1963, the year she rebuilt the kitchen after the flue fire that had scorched one wall. A small fire, before his time, that she had never once mentioned. The letter was addressed to whoever lifts this stone. It said that the house had burned a little that year and been mended, and that her father had told her when she cried about the scorched wall that she was crying at the wrong thing. A house is only walls around a table, she had written. And walls can be raised again in a season, but a table is a promise, and a promise only burns if you let it. If you are reading this, something has come down. Build it back. Put the pot on. The door was never the wood, you know. The door was that it opened. He sat on the new sill plate with the letter for a long time, in sawdust and evening light, and Wally, who found him there, said nothing. Which is what 26 years in courtrooms teaches a man about the moments that matter. They finished the house in October, 1 year almost to the day. The first fire in the hearth was lit from apple prunings and drew perfectly, and the blue enamel pot. It had been in the barn, in the fireproof box, because he had saved the small things and lost the great one, and now understood they were the same thing, went back on the stove. The new door hung true in the old frame, and Edmund fitted it, thought a while, and left the lock set in its box on the shelf. And on the first cold Saturday, with the sauna smoke standing straight off the lake and half the North Shore's trucks in his yard and coffee going out the door in a relay of borrowed mugs, Edmund Sayer understood finally and completely the whole shape of the year. Margot Delane had believed that ownership was a thing you could take with volume, with letters and fines and lawsuits, and, when the volume failed, with one struck match at 3 in the morning. And a match is, in fairness, the loudest argument there is. But it is also the shortest. It speaks once, orange and roaring, and then it is spent, and it owns nothing but ash. A hearth is the opposite of a match. It is quiet, and it is patient, and it speaks every morning of every winter for 100 years, and it belongs, like the land, like the truth, like the table, not to whoever can set the fire, but to whoever keeps it.